Okay, so in this video, I'm going to talk about how getters and setters work in Haxe. But before I talk about that, it makes sense for me to talk about access identifiers because they kind of work hand in hand. So what are access identifiers? Well, these are ways you can sort of set access to variables in Haxe. So let's say I have something like a public variable called x, and it's going to be an int without a default value, and you can kind of set things here, so like null and null. And let's kind of go through what these things mean. So there are 5 type of access identifiers here. So default, null, never, get, and set. And like I said at the beginning of this video, we are not going to talk about get and set. We'll talk about that in the next video. So we'll talk about these 3 access identifiers. The first one is default, so that will give the variable normal read and write access. The second one is null, so this will make sure the variable has no read or write access from outside. So outside classes or outside methods that want to use this variable will not have read or write access. And never means that there's no read or write access inside the class that the variable is being used in. So let's see this in action. So like I said before, here's our public x variable with our 2 access identifiers currently set to null. Now, funnily enough, even though null gives you no read or write access from outside, inside it kind of acts like a default. I'll explain that later on. So how access identifiers work is on the left side is where you put your read access, and on the right side is where you put your write access. Let's create a public new constructor here to kind of make this main instantiable inside the static method. So we can do something like var main equals new main, and then we can say trace main.x. So when I run this, it shouldn't print anything out because I haven't defined x. But if I say main.x equals 11, I'll get 11. So this acts the same as default when it's inside the same class. If I were to do never to both of them, that means I have no read or write access. Basically, this variable doesn't exist. Let's make them both default for now, and this will act as normal. And what we can do is say we want to give it read access, but we don't want to write to it. So that would be never, and that wouldn't work. Similarly, if we want to say, okay, we want to give it write access, but no read access, we can put never here, and that will not work. We'll go back to making it default. Let's create another class called 2, and let's add another variable to it, and another constructor, and let's instantiate that class here and assign the variable here. So with default access identifiers, this should work as normal. But say we didn't want to give it write access. So if we changed it to null here, that has the same effect. And we could do never as well. But as you can see, null works for if it's another class that's trying to access the variable, whereas it wouldn't work inside the same class. Similarly, we could prevent any reading for this variable, and both of these will not work. Now, if you're familiar with Haxe 4, you'll notice that there is a new keyword called final. And this kind of does the same thing as a default and never here, in the sense that you can read to it, but you can't write to it. So I can assign a variable of 20 to z here, but I can't do this. That won't work. So keep that in mind when working with access identifiers, that you can kind of do the same thing with final as default never. Okay, so that's it for this video. I hope you found it useful. Please like and subscribe for more. In the next video, we'll talk about get and set access identifiers.